My fellow citizens of the world,
the potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists. We must never let the weight of this combination endanger our liberties or democratic processes.
YouTube, this is Winston Smith from the Hard News Network. Today is episode 4 in the Combating Cult Mind Control series. We're going to dive a bit deeper into the 4 components of mind control: behavior, information, thought, and emotion. We can't really understand mind control without realizing behavior modification techniques and the influence that conformity and obedience to authority have on people. If we take these 4 components, these insights from social psychology as a foundation, we can begin to identify the structure and components that make up mind control. Hassan says that as he sees it, mind control can be largely understood by analysis of the 3 components described by psychologist Leon Festinger in what is known as cognitive dissonance theory. The components he lists are control of behavior, control of thoughts, and control of emotion. Each of these has a powerful effect on the other 2. If you change one, the others will tend to follow. And if you succeed in changing all 3, then the individual will be completely swept away. However, Hassan says that from his experience in researching destructive cults, he has found an additional element that is vital, and that is control of information. If you control the information that people receive, you restrict their ability to think for themselves. And that is something that we have seen anytime there has been forms of media developed. If you think back to one of the first ones, writing. Publishing companies form. In the beginning, there were hundreds, if not thousands. Now there are just a select few that dominate the market. The same exact thing we see with cable television. This is shocking that only, down to 3 or 4 networks control all of the channels now. And this is part of the war on independent media, because with the internet, right now there are so many factions. There are hundreds of thousands of websites, if not millions. I don't know the numbers, but I wouldn't. I imagine there are millions. And what the corporate media is trying to do, they're trying to consolidate power, consolidate the information. We've seen that with VidCon and YouTube stars trying to get picked up by commercial entities, MTV, for example. All of these people are. It's very tempting, if you're an independent YouTuber and you get picked up, offered large sums of money. But what happens is you no longer maintain your independence when that occurs. And so when you look on television and see news reporters and journalists speaking, for example, Wolf Blitzer or any news anchor, these people are not speaking their own thoughts. They are speaking pre-written scripts made by and brainstormed on by dozens of people, vetted through many departments in the company. And the viewpoint expressed is company approved. What independent media offers is the person speaking actually believes what they're saying. If Wolf Blitzer is saying something, he's just one single element in a larger corporate machine, doing his job and reading the script that was made for him. Independent YouTubers are genuine, they're authentic, they're saying what's on their mind, and that calls for instances of potentially them messing up, making mistakes, and the credible ones come out and admit that. When they state something that's incorrect, they will come out and make a correction and recall their previous statement. But corporations are afraid to do that because if they do it, they're afraid they'll lose credibility because it looks bad. Them recalling or retracting a message or a news story will become a news story in itself, and other programs, their rival competitors, will come out and seek to use that against them. However, what they don't realize is that people of average intelligence view that as a credible move when you correct yourself. But they don't see it that way because the way they work with their PR companies is that no negative information can get out into the public, and so they seek to hide and cover up these instances. And this is why you see the New York Times and other online entities going back and changing online articles. Now let's go into cognitive dissonance theory. In 1950, Festinger summarized it this way: if you change a person's behavior, his thoughts and feelings will change to minimize the dissonance. What did he mean by dissonance? Well, in basic terms, he was referring to the conflict that occurs when a thought, a feeling, or a behavior is altered in contradiction to the other two. A person can tolerate only a certain amount of this discrepancy between his thoughts, feelings, and actions, which make up together the different components of that person's identity. His theory states, and a great deal of later research has confirmed, that if any one of these three components changes, the other two will shift to reduce the dissonance. So how does this kind of shift apply to the behavior of people in cults? Festinger looked for a place to examine his ideas in the real world. In 1956, he published a book, When Prophecy Fails, about a Wisconsin flying saucer cult whose leader predicted the end of the world. The cult leader claimed to be in mental contact with aliens from another planet. Followers sold their homes, gave away their money, and stood at the appointed date on a mountainside waiting all night to be picked up by flying saucers before a flood destroyed the world the next morning. When morning came with no saucers and no flood, just a spate of satirical news stories about the group, the followers might have been expected to become disillusioned and angry. And a few of them did, but they were the fringe members who had not invested much time or energy. Most members, though, became even more convinced than ever. Their leader proclaimed that the aliens had witnessed their faithful vigil and decided to spare the earth. Members wound up feeling more committed to the leader, even after they took a dramatic public stance that resulted in this public humiliation. Most Jehovah's Witnesses responded to the failure of the group's many prophecies of the end of the world with renewed faith. Cognitive dissonance theory helps explain why this heightened commitment occurred. According to Festinger, people need to maintain order and meaning in their life. They need to think they're acting according to their self-image and their own values. If their behavior changes for any reason, their self-image and values change to match that. The important thing to recognize about cults is that they deliberately create dissonance in people this way and exploit it to control them. Now, let's take a look into element 1, that is behavior control. This is the regulation of an individual's physical reality. It includes control of the environment where they live, what clothes they wear, the food they eat, how much sleep they get, what jobs, rituals, and other actions they are permitted to perform. This need for behavior control is the reason most cults prescribe a very rigid schedule for members. Each day, a significant amount of time is devoted to cult rituals and indoctrination activities. Members are also typically assigned to accomplish specific goals and tasks, thus restricting their free time and their behavior. In destructive cults, there's always something to do, and this is very true of the Jehovah's Witnesses. When I was in about 17, maybe about 10 years ago, they had a Tuesday night meeting that was 1 hour, I think from like 7:30 to 8:30. They had a Thursday night meeting from 7:15 to 9:15. Saturday morning service from 9 a.m. to 12 p.m. And often people were encouraged to go out even after that, after they had lunch, and continue on until 3, 4 o'clock. Sunday morning was the weekly Watchtower meeting from 9:30 to 11:30. And often, again, people were encouraged to go out and service after that in the afternoon. Mondays were for... So that leaves Monday and Wednesday, the only 2 days of the week where there are no scheduled organizational activities, but they say set aside Monday for family Bible study. So that is at least another hour there in your home with your family members or friends. So really you have just Wednesday, which you need to, because there's no other time, you need Wednesday to go over Sunday's Watchtower, because you need to go over the answers and read through it and inform yourself so you can participate in Sunday's discussion. So if you abide by all of their recommendations, you have no days where you're not doing a single thing for the religion. And I was having a conversation the other day with some friends. They all went to camp when they were in elementary school, middle school, high school, and everyone was going around the table saying what they did in camp, telling their camp stories, and people asked me what did you do? And some of these people didn't know I was a witness, and I was just I told them I was a witness, and I was I worked at a grocery store, and I went to congregation meetings. That was it. No extra recreational activities. And they were shocked. They were you had no extracurricular activities outside of school? And I was work and meetings. That was it. And preaching. So what this does is isolate people, especially children, from interacting with outsiders, because if they do, the likelihood that they will leave the religion is much greater. And this is the essence. They have perfected behavior control in this manner. There is literally a schedule to abide by. And in some of the more restrictive groups, members have to ask permission from the leaders to do certain things. In other groups, a person is made so financially dependent that their choices of behavior are narrowed automatically. And again, in the witnesses, a lot of the elders and ministerial servants ran their own working class businesses like painting, plumbing businesses, construction. Some of them, I know for a fact, even have illegal immigrants working for them because they're cheaper. And what the elders and ministerial servants do is employ other people in the congregation, the younger people just out of high school, because nobody goes to college. And so what that does is make you financially dependent. So if you ever do leave the religion, you're also going to lose your job and your income. Then it puts your house and your family at risk of becoming poor and homeless. And so this is how they make you dependent on them, that if you leave, you're not just deciding not to go to meetings, but your interpersonal relationships, your financial situation, all of that goes with it. And Hassan goes on to say some members have to ask for bus fare, clothing money, permission to seek health care, things that most of us take for granted, and often they have to ask permission to call a friend or relative that's not in the group. Again, this is true of witnesses. If you have a family member that's disfellowshipped, if you have to interact with them, it's recommended that you speak with the elders to discuss what your conversation will be about, and they can give their blessing for you to speak with them. They just keep a tight rein in this way on members' behavior and on their thoughts and feelings as well. And behavior is also often controlled by the requirement that everyone act as a single group. In a lot of cults, people eat together, work together, have group meetings, sometimes sleep together in the same dormitory. Again, when we had conventions, people would all go to hotels for the weekend or for the week and stay together, eat every meal together. Individualism is basically fiercely discouraged. People can sometimes be assigned a buddy. When you see witnesses preaching, that's a buddy. You have one, sometimes two other people that you go door to door with, or they're placed in small units of half a dozen members or so, and they all go to a certain neighborhood and go up and down the streets. The chain of command in cults is usually authoritarian, flowing from the leader through their lieutenants or their sub-leaders down to the rank-and-file members. And in a well-regulated environment like this, all behaviors can be either rewarded or punished. If a person performs well, they'll be given public praise from the higher-ups, sometimes gifts or a promotion. If the person performs poorly, they'll be publicly singled out and criticized or forced to do manual labor, like cleaning toilets or polishing other members' shoes. Other forms of punishment might include fasting, cold showers, staying up for an all-night vigil, or doing remedial work. Those who actively participate in their own punishment will eventually come to believe that they do deserve it. Each particular group has its own distinctive set of rituals that help bind it together. They typically include mannerisms of speech. In the religion, for example, we had the truth is the phrase that you use to refer to the Jehovah's Witness religion. Christendom was used to refer to all other forms of Christianity that were pagan, but Christianity was used to refer to the witnesses. So again, it's this own kind of terminology that outsiders don't know of. Door to door is another phrase that's preaching on Saturday mornings. And there's a whole host, I'm sure I'm forgetting some, that thankfully have left my mind in the past decade that I've been out of it. In the Moonies, which is the cult Hassan was a part of, he says they followed a lot of Asian customs, like taking their shoes off when entering a Moonie center, kneeling and bowing when greeting older members, doing these little things that helped make them feel that they were special and superior. And psychologists call these acts social proof. If a member isn't behaving sufficiently enthusiastically, they might be confronted by a leader and accused of being selfish or impure or of not trying hard enough, and they'll be urged to become like an older group member, even to the extent of mimicking that person's tone of voice. And that happened when we would give talks maybe like once every month or two. I was in the ministry school, and I would give like 5-10 minute speeches up on the podium, and you would get graded. And the elder would go up after you're done and publicly praise or criticize you, oftentimes both. And they had a checklist, like a form after that they would give you, and they would sit down for 5 minutes after the meeting and talk with you, and they would say, oh, like brother so-and-so, you know how he does these hand gestures and his intonation and his voice, try to pay attention next time he does that and mimic what he does. So all of these things, it's just shocking. All of these points that Hassan lists out, I can reference back to a moment or an instance when I was in the religion, and these things are very self-evident. And he goes on to say, obedience to a leader's command is the most important lesson to learn. A cult's leaders can't command someone's inner thoughts, but they know if they can command behavior that their hearts and minds will follow. So that covers off on behavior. Moving on to information control. This is the second component of mind control, and it provides the tools with which we think and understand reality. Without accurate, up-to-date information, we can easily be manipulated and controlled. Deny a person information that they require to make sound judgments, and they will become incapable of doing so. Deception is the biggest tool of information control because it robs people of the ability to make informed decisions. Outright lying, withholding information, and distorting information all become essential strategies, especially when recruiting new members. By using deception, cults rob their victims of informed consent, and in the case of religious cults, this lack of honest disclosure certainly violates people's individual religious rights. In many totalistic cults, people have minimal access to non-cult newspapers, magazines, TV, radio, online information. Certain information is forbidden, labeled as unhealthy. Apostate literature is what the witnesses called it. When I was growing up, just as the internet was becoming a thing, we got a Windows 95 computer when I was, I don't know, maybe 7 or 8. And in meetings, the organization saw this happening, that computers were coming into members' homes, really eventually as a necessity. And so they said, keep the computer in the living room. This was a rule. Because if it's in the living room, the people on the computer would be less likely to try to look at websites that were forbidden because people would be walking past them more frequently. And of course, apostate websites was a big thing. Apostate books. I was living in a friend's house that was a witness after I got kicked out of my own house. Someone was willing to take me in, and this was a time when I wasn't sure if I wanted to remain a witness or not, and so I was reading a lot of quote-unquote apostate literature to kind of look into the doubts and questions I had, and it was found by this person I was staying with, this family, and they said, don't bring, you can read these books, but don't bring them in the house. This is how crazy they are. They didn't even want it. They said, keep them in your car. Now, I was thankful they didn't kick me out of their house and that they continued to let me stay there. But this is just an example that they're so afraid of this information. They don't even want to see a book cover because it might tempt them. So that's what I did. I kept the books in the trunk of my car. They just come up with labels, apostate information, fake news, as we see on cable news networks saying now, or conspiracy theories. There's always a term to dismiss information, outside information, when you're in a cult. And so that way you don't even have to address the arguments that it poses. You just simply say, that's crazy, that's a conspiracy theory, that's apostate literature, that's satanic, that's pagan. This is all cult tactics to control information so that you never even get to the arguments that others are making against you. And the members are kept so busy they don't even have free time to think and seek this outside information. And when they do read, it's primarily cult-generated propaganda or material that has been censored to keep members focused. And there was a study I read. I would be interested if anyone can find this. I might look into it after. I think the Watchtower magazines or witness literature in general was examined, and they found that it's like a 3rd or 4th grade reading level. So that is a testament to the fact that a lot of witnesses are undereducated. Most just have high school diplomas, but this is what they do. I guess that kind of makes sense from if you're an organization. I think the average American has like a 6th grade reading level, but I remember this being like a grade or 2 below the average American. So again, undereducated people only consuming one type of information approved by the organization. And this information control extends across all relationships. People are not allowed to talk to each other about anything critical of the leader, the doctrines, or the organizations. They have to spy on each other and report improper activities or comments to leaders, often in the form of written reports, which is a technique pioneered by the Nazis with the Hitler Youth. New converts are discouraged from sharing doubts with anyone other than a superior or their Bible study instructor. These newbies are typically chaperoned until they prove their devotion and loyalty. And most importantly, people are told to avoid contact with ex-members and critics. The people who could provide the most outside, that is, real, accurate information, are to be completely shunned. And some groups go even so far as to screen members' letters and phone calls. Information is usually compartmentalized to keep members from knowing the big picture. In larger groups, people are told only as much as they need to know in order to perform their jobs. A member in one city, therefore, does not necessarily know about an important legal decision, media story, or internal dispute that is creating turmoil in the group somewhere else. Cult members naturally feel they know more about what's going on in their group than outsiders. But in counseling ex-members, Hassan said he found that they often know far less than almost anyone else. And this is a very interesting point because when I was in the religion and having doubts, one of the first, this always came up in my mind. I would be reading this apostate information online, and they would be talking about court cases, about child sex abuse cover-ups, and I was like, what? Like, I was like, this has never been talked about in the meetings. I've never heard any witness mention this. How can this be going on? How can the organization be getting sued and nobody around me know it? And all I know are witnesses. So it was very fascinating, the thought process I underwent. And that's when I started to realize, obviously, that not everything is mentioned at the meetings. Especially concerning the organization, which is really just a company. They kept members in the dark about a lot of the dealings that they had. So, you know, they keep people in the dark, and Hassan says Moonies are often ignorant. Moonies was his cult, ignorant of the cult's involvement in the arms manufacturing industry. Scientologists don't know about the imprisonment of 11 leaders for the largest infiltration of government agencies ever undertaken. That's interesting. That is not something I know too much about. I'll have to look into that as well. He goes on to say that destructive organizations also control information by having levels of truth. Cult ideologies often have outsider doctrines and insider doctrines. The outsider material is relatively bland stuff for the general public or new converts. Witnesses had one Watchtower magazine to give out door to door and another version to go over in the Sunday meetings. It was kind of like the ones we handed out were dumbed down and simplified. Even further, if you couldn't imagine. And the inner doctrines are gradually unveiled as the person is more deeply involved. So if you're in a Bible study, you eventually get access to more information and you go to more of the meetings. And it's really only when they're ready to be deemed, quote unquote, ready by superiors can they begin get baptized and go door to door. And the example Hassan gives is that Moonies always said publicly that they were pro-American, pro-democracy, pro-family, and he said they were pro-American and that they wanted what they thought was best for America, which is to become a theocracy under Moon's rule. They believed democracy was instituted by God to allow the Unification Church the space to organize a theocratic dictatorship. They were pro-family in believing that every human being's true family was Moon, his wife, and his spiritual children. But the inner doctrine was, and it still is, that America is inferior to Korea and must become subservient to it, that democracy is a foolish system that God is phasing out, and that people must be cut off from their physical, as opposed to spiritual families, if they are at all critical of the cult. A member can sincerely believe that the outer doctrines are not lies, but just a different level of truth. By creating this environment where truth is multi-leveled, the cult directors make it almost impossible for a member to make definitive, objective assessments. If they have problems, they are told that they're not mature or advanced enough to know the whole truth yet, but they're assured that all will become clear shortly. If they work hard, they'll earn the right to understand the high levels of truth. And witnesses will often say, like, if you have doubts about something, they'll say, well, there's a reason that you don't know it yet, and it will become known to you in Jehovah's due time. And that's just a cop-out for saying, there's no logic behind this, and we don't know the answer, and you're confused, but it's okay. So, again, no actual logical thought behind a lot of these beliefs. And there are often even inner layers of belief. For example, an advanced member who thinks they know a cult's complete doctrine is still several layers away from what the higher-ups know. There was an elder's book that I did not know about until I was maybe 16 that is given to elders when they become an elder. And I was just shocked to learn that there was a book that was kept secret from other members. Now, you can go online and Google it and look at it, which is what I did when I found out it existed. And it's very interesting to read. And when you ask, I remember asking a ministerial servant about it because I don't remember where I initially heard it, that it existed, but I remember confronting a ministerial servant who was like kind of cool, like not, he's someone I could go to and ask without knowing that I wouldn't get like red flagged in any way, like he wouldn't bring it to the elders. And he was very hesitant to answer yes, but he did. It was a very awkward conversation, but extremely hesitant, but he did admit that it existed. So, again, one more instance that made me continue to have doubts. And a lot of the people who insist on knowing too much too fast are redirected toward usually an external goal until they forget their objections or they object too loudly and are kicked out and vilified. Third, we have thought control. This includes indoctrinating members so thoroughly that they internalize the group doctrine, incorporate a new language system, and use thought-stopping techniques to keep their mind, quote-unquote, centered. In order to be a good member, a person must learn to manipulate their own thought processes. In totalistic cults, the ideology is internalized as the truth. And this is very interesting because that is what the phrase in the religion, as a Jehovah's Witness, they used constantly. And sometimes I still catch myself saying, like, oh, when I was in the truth, just because it's so embedded in my thought process. The doctrine serves to filter incoming information, but it also regulates how the information can be thought about. Usually the doctrine is absolutist, divides everything into black versus white or us versus them. Everything that is good is embodied in the leader or the group. Everything that is bad is on the outside. And I talk about that. I incorporate some philosophical concepts filtered through the religion in my video Jehovah's Witnesses, a Cult Explained, on the top of the Cult Watchers page, which is very interesting. If you're interested in philosophy at all and social psychology, that's a good video to watch. It's taken from my my undergrad thesis. So I recommend that. And the doctrine often claims to answer all questions and all answer all problems to any situations. The members don't need to think for themselves because the doctrine is doing it for them. And often they claim that their doctrine is scientific, but that's never actually the case. A destructive cult even has its own loaded language of unique words and expressions. Since language provides the symbols we use for thinking, using only certain words serves to control thoughts. Cult language is totalistic and therefore condenses complex situations, labels them, and then reduces them to cult cliches. This simplistic label then governs how members think in any situation. In the Moonies, which is Hassan's cult, for example, whenever a member had difficulty relating to someone who was either above or below them in status, it was called a Cain-Abel problem. It didn't matter who was involved or what the problem was, it was simply a Cain-Abel problem. The term itself dictated how the problem had to be resolved. Cain needed to obey Abel and follow him rather than kill him, as Cain killed Abel in the Old Testament. Case closed, that's it. To think anything else would be to obey Satan's wish that evil Cain should prevail over righteous Abel. A critical thought about a leader's misconduct cannot get past this roadblock in a devout member's mind. The cult's cliches and loaded language also put up an invisible wall between believers and outsiders. The language helps to make members feel special. It separates them from the general public. It also serves to confuse newcomers who want to understand what members are talking about. The newbies think they're merely there to have that they merely have to study harder in order to understand the truth, which they believe is precisely expressed in this new language. But in reality, this loaded language helps them learn how not to think or understand. They learn that understanding just means accepting and believing. Another aspect of thought control involves training members to block out any information that is critical of the group. A member's normal defense mechanisms often become so twisted that they defend their own new cult identity against their old former self. The first line of defense includes denial. For example, saying what you say isn't happening at all. There's rationalization. People will say, oh, well, this is happening, but it's for a good reason. And then the justification, this is happening because it needs to. And then wishful thinking, I'd like it to be true, so maybe it really is. If information transmitted to a cult member is perceived as an attack on either the leader, the doctrine, or the group, a defense wall goes up. Members are trained to disbelieve any criticism. Critical words have been explained away in advance. For instance, as the lies about us that Satan puts in people's minds. This is something that the leaders would say. Or, oh, the lies that the world conspiracy prints in the news media to discredit us because they know we're on to them. Paradoxically, criticism of the group is used to confirm that the cult's view of the world is correct. Because of thought control, factual information that challenges the cult worldview does not register properly. And that is what witnesses do when they say, if you go door to door and you face persecution, they had some saying it was like, persecution is a sign that we are doing God's work. So all that does is reinforce when people slam the door on your face when you're preaching, or when people call you crazy, or whatever they do when they attack you as a witness. It just reinforces in their mind that, oh, this is persecution. This is what God's believers did and went through in the Bible, and this is just the modern day parallel. And so it strengthens their commitment. Something that's more widely used and more effective is the technique for controlling cult members' thoughts, and it's called something called thought stopping. Members are taught to use thought stopping on themselves. They're told it will help them grow and be more effective. Whenever a member experiences a bad thought, for example, they use thought stopping to halt the negativity and recenter themselves, shutting out any threats or challenges the cult's version of reality. And the Independent thinking phrase is what witnesses use. Anything that verges off the path of approved doctrine, they label independent thinking. And independent thinking is apostate, it's satanic, it's from the devil. And so this is when you're so indoctrinated, and if you start to question, you'll take a step back, because I did this in the beginning, and be like, oh, this is independent thinking. I'm starting to go down the wrong path and question what's in the watchtower. And then you stop yourself and you don't pursue that avenue of thought any further. Different groups use different thought-stopping techniques, which can include praying, chanting, meditating, speaking in tongues, singing, and these actions can be useful and valuable depending on how they're used, but they're perverted in destructive cults. And often they become quite mechanical because the person is programmed to activate them at the first sign of doubt. And within weeks, these techniques can become ingrained and so automatic that the person is usually not even aware that they just had a bad thought. They're only aware that they're suddenly chanting or ritualizing. Through the use of these thought-stopping tactics, members think they're growing, but in reality they're just turning themselves into thought-stopping addicts. After leaving a cult that employs extensive thought-stopping techniques, a person normally goes through a difficult withdrawal process before they can overcome this addiction. Thought-stopping is the most direct way to short-circuit a person's ability to test reality. If people are able to think only positive thoughts about their involvement with the group, they're most certainly stuck. Since the doctrine is perfect, the leader's perfect, any problem that crops up is assumed to be the fault of the individual member. They learn to always blame themselves and simply work harder. Thought control can effectively block out any feelings that do not correspond with the group doctrine. It can serve to keep a cult member working as an obedient slave, and when thought is controlled, feelings and behaviors are usually controlled as well. Moving on to the last element of mind control, that is emotional control. This attempts to manipulate narrow the range of a person's feelings. All or nothing. Either you feel wonderful as a chosen member of the elite, someone really special and loved, part of the wonderful movement, or you're broken, unspiritual, have bad karma, are guilty of sin, you need to repent, try harder, become better, more devoted. But most cult members can see that guilt and fear are being used to control them. They're both essential tools to keep people under control. And this guilt comes in many forms. Historical guilt, for instance, the fact that the U.S. dropped the atomic bomb on Hiroshima. There's identity guilt, a thought such as, I'm not living up to my potential. There's guilt over past actions, like I cheated once on a test. And there's social guilt. For example, people are dying of starvation. All these can be exploited by destructive cult leaders. And we see these being used in news networks today as well. And maybe I'll do a video on guilt. Like white guilt is definitely tied into a lot of these examples that I just listed, that Hassan mentions. But members are believed to always take the blame so that they respond gratefully whenever a leader points out to any of their shortcomings. Fear is used to bind the group members together in several ways. The first is the creation of an outside enemy who is persecuting the group. For example, the FBI will jail or kill you, Satan will carry you off to hell, psychiatrists will give you electroshock therapy, armed members of rival sects will shoot or torture you, and of course, ex-members and critics will try to persecute you. Second is the terror of discovery and punishment by cult leaders and members. Fear of what can happen to you if you don't do your job well can be very potent. Some groups claim that nuclear holocaust or other disasters will result if members are lax in their commitment. Absolutely insane. In order to control someone through emotions, feelings themselves often have to be completely redefined. For example, everyone wants happiness, but if happiness is redefined as being closer to God, and God is unhappy, as he apparently is in many religious cults, then the way to be happy is to be unhappy. Happiness, therefore, consists of suffering so you can grow closer to God. This idea also appears in some non-cult theologies, but in a cult, it's a tool for exploitation and control. In some groups, happiness simply means following the leader's directions, recruiting a lot of members, and bringing in money. Sometimes it's also defined as the sense of community provided by the cult to those who enjoy high status within it. Loyalty and devotion are the most highly respected emotions of them all. Members are not allowed to feel or express negative emotions except toward outsiders. They're taught never to feel for themselves or their own needs, but always to think of the group and never complain. They never are to criticize a leader, but always are to criticize themselves instead. Many groups exercise control over interpersonal relationships as well. Leaders tell people to avoid certain members or to spend time with others. They tell them who they can marry and control the entire marriage relationship, including their sex lives. Some members are required to deny and suppress sexual feelings, which become a source of bottled up frustration and can be channeled into other outlets, such as harder work. Other groups, on the flip side, require sexuality, and a member who hangs back is made to feel selfish. Either way, the group is exercising emotional control. People are often kept off balance, praised one minute and tongue-lashed the next. And in some groups, one day you'll be doing public relations in front of TV cameras, and the next you'll be in another state doing manual labor as punishment for some imagined sin. This misuse of reward and punishment fosters dependency and helplessness. Such double-bind behavior is a commonplace in cults. Confession of past sins or wrong attitudes is also a powerful device for emotional control. Of course, once someone has publicly confessed, rarely is their old sin truly forgiven or forgotten. The minute they get out of line, it will be hauled out and used against them to manipulate them into obeying. Anyone who finds themselves in a cult confession needs to remember this warning. Anything you say can and will be used against you. This device can even extend to blackmail if you leave the cult. And when it doesn't, former members are often scared to speak out just in case their embarrassing secrets are made public. The most powerful technique for emotional control is phobia indoctrination. Members can have a panic reaction at the thought of leaving the group. They're told that if they leave, they will be lost and defenseless in the face of dark, worldly horrors. They'll go insane, they'll be killed, they'll become drug addicts or commit suicide. This is what the witnesses do and tell you if you leave the religion that will happen. Such tales are repeated often, both in lectures and in hushed tones through informal gossip. It becomes nearly impossible for indoctrinated cult members to feel they can have any happiness, security, or fulfillment outside the group. And when cult leaders tell the public that members are free to leave anytime they want, they give the impression that members have free will and that they're simply choosing to stay. But actually, the members have no real choice because they've been indoctrinated to fear the outside world. If a person's emotions are successfully brought under the group's control, their thoughts and behavior will follow. Each component of the BITE model, behavior, information, thought, and emotion, has great influence on the human mind. Together, they form a totalistic web, one that is used to manipulate even the most intelligent, creative, ambitious, and strong-willed person. In fact, it's often the strongest-minded individuals who make the most involved and enthusiastic cult members. Some of these practices could fall into more than one of these categories. For example, some groups change people's names in order to hasten the formulation of a new cult identity. This technique could fall under all four categories. There are a lot of variations between groups. Some are overt in their phobia indoctrination, others are very subtle. What matters most is the overall impact on the individual. Are they truly in control of their life choices? This is a question that needs to be asked. The only way to tell is to give them the opportunity to reflect, to gain free access to all information, and to know that they are free to leave the group if they so choose.